so very much.
Hi, that was quite a preamble, singing and game shows, and I just want to thank, I can't believe that this whole Creative Mornings crew is volunteer. Can we just give them a huge round of applause? I have some very disappointing news to start, which is that this will have absolutely nothing to do with wilderness. But maybe by the end of this, I'll figure out a way to weave it in. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you so much for coming out this morning. I'll do what some earlier people did, just a quick check. Who here has heard of StoryCorps? Okay. Anybody here participated? A few people. And who has no idea what I'm doing up here and is counting the minutes till they can get back to the donuts to steal them and take them home with them? Okay. Somebody's lying, because I know somebody here doesn't know what StoryCorps is. So I'm going to talk a little bit about StoryCorps. I'm going to play a bunch of stories. We'll get you out of here by 10 o'clock. StoryCorps is a very simple idea that is about 18 years old. I was a radio documentary producer for decades before starting StoryCorps. And for better or worse, I was always interested in audio as a public service as opposed to audio as entertainment, and loved doing documentaries for all those years. But had this crazy idea for StoryCorps, where we put a booth in Grand Central Terminal where you can bring anyone who you want to honor by listening to their story, a parent, a friend, a grandparent. You come to this booth with your grandma. You're met by a facilitator who works for StoryCorps. You go inside the booth, the door shuts, you're in complete silence, the lights are low, it's kind of a sacred space. And for 40 minutes, you look your grandma in the eyes and you ask her questions and you listen. And I knew from making radio documentaries that the microphone gives you the license to say things and to ask things that you don't normally get to ask. So from the very beginning of StoryCorps, people thought of this as if I had 40 minutes, they're 40-minute interviews. If I had 40 minutes left to live, what would I say to this person who means so much to me? At the end of the interview, you get a copy, and another one stays with us and goes to the Library of Congress, so your great-great-great-great-great-grandkids get to know your grandmother through her voice and story. So a very, very, very simple idea. And I'll take you through the whole history of StoryCorps very quickly through stories. I'm just going to start by playing a story from the first weeks in Grand Central Terminal. And I have to admit that early on at StoryCorps, it was not very popular. People did not know what the fuck we were doing. We had many empty spaces. We actually had one woman who, I believe she came 175 or 180 times. She would drag people off the subways and bring them in. So we had like 3 super fans and a lot of empty slots. But eventually it got extremely popular. We'll get to that later. But this is someone who came. This is actually a kid named Josh Littman, who was 12 years old at the time, and he brought his mom. This is, again, the first or second week of StoryCorps. He asked his mom to come to StoryCorps with him. Josh has Asperger's syndrome, which, as many of you know, is a form of autism, where kids are incredibly smart, have a very difficult time socially, often get tortured at school, and develop obsessions. In New York City, it's really common for kids with Asperger's to have obsessions with the subway system, learning the maps, learning the different kinds of trains. In Josh's case, he is obsessed with animals. When you come to StoryCorps, there are questions that we suggest you ask. Josh threw those out, as you'll hear, and wrote all of his own questions. So we're going to watch Josh. Now, the StoryCorps interviews are 40-minute conversations, so we're going to watch Josh about 3 minutes of his 40-minute conversation with his mom. So let's listen.
From a scale of 1 to 10, do you think your life would be different without animals?
I think it would be an 8 without animals, because they add so much pleasure to life.
How else do you think your life would be different without them?
I could do without things like cockroaches and snakes.
Well, I'm okay with snakes as long as they're not venomous or can constrict you or anything.
Yeah, I'm not a big snake person.
But cockroach is just the insect we love to hate.
Yeah, it really is.
Have you ever thought you couldn't cope with having a child?
I remember when you were a baby, you had really bad colic, so you would just cry and cry. And
What's
I didn't know
colic?
It's when you get this stomach ache and all you do is scream for like 4 hours
Even
a
louder
night.
than Amy does?
You were pretty loud, but Amy's was more high-pitched.
I think it feels like everyone seems to like Amy more, like she's like the perfect little angel.
Well, I can understand why you think that people like Amy more, and I'm not saying it's because of your Asperger's syndrome, but being friendly comes easily to Amy, whereas I think for you it's more difficult. But the
Yeah,
people who
like-
take the time to get to know you love you so much.
Like Ben or Eric or Carlos.
Yeah, and
Like I have better quality friends but less quantity.
I wouldn't judge the quality, but I think
I mean, like, first thing is like Amy loved Claudia, then she hated Claudia, she loved Claudia, then
you know
she
what?
hated Claudia.
Part of that's a girl thing, honey. The important thing for you is that you have a few very good friends, and really that's what you need in life.
Did I turn out to be the son you wanted when I was born? Like, did I meet your expectations? And
You've exceeded my expectations, sweetie, because, you know, sure, you have these fantasies of what your child's going to be like, but you have made me grow so much as a parent because you think...
well, I was the one who made you a parent.
You were the one who made me a parent. That's a good point. But also because you think differently from, you know, what they tell you in the parenting books.
Yeah.
I really had to learn to think out of the box with you. And it's made me much more creative as a parent and as a person. And I'll always thank you
And
for
that helped when Amy was born.
And that helped with Amy was born. But you are just so incredibly special to me. And I'm so lucky to have you as my son.
Oh, creative one. Watching that, I was remembering that Josh got hundreds or thousands of letters after this broadcast, and her mom put them in a notebook. They weren't letters, they were emails. And her mom put them in a notebook, and when he would get tortured at school, they would come home and they'd read them together, the emails from public radio listeners about what a great kid he is. So that's week one of StoryCorps. Eventually, StoryCorps did become popular. And we went national. We have these Airstream trailers that travel around the country. And now we've had about 650,000 people participate in StoryCorps. So it's the largest collection of human voices ever gathered. And you know, really, as I said, because of the nature of what happens in the StoryCorps booth, we're kind of collecting the wisdom of humanity. I'm gonna play, and you know, I think StoryCorps is sort of the opposite of reality TV in many ways. And I want you to know that if you have questions, just raise your hand. I'm happy to answer questions through this. And I will. You don't have to get the mic. I'll just repeat it into this mic. It's the opposite of reality TV. Nobody comes to one of the secret sauces of StoryCorps is that nobody comes to get rich. Nobody comes to get famous. It's just an act of generosity and love. And we're surrounded by so much kind of bullshit nowadays that when you hear people just being authentic with each other, you're kind of walking on holy ground. I'm actually not going to torture you with sad stories today, which we're known for. But people, even on the happy stories, we often hear about people crying. And I think that's because it's so rare that you hear people being, you know, authentic with each other in these days that we live in, certainly in the media. So I'm going to take us now a bunch of years forward. This is another parent-child interview. It's just a lovely interview recorded in Jackson, Mississippi, in one of our mobile booths. And this is Albert and Aiden Sykes. Aiden is a fourth grader, and let's just listen in on his conversation with his dad.
Do you remember what was going through your head when you first saw me?
I remember when the doctor pulled you out, the first thing I thought was that he was being too rough with you. And he actually held you like a little Sprite bottle, and he was like, "Here's your baby." That was the most proud moment of my life. Don't tell your brothers, because it's three of y'all. But it was like looking at a blank canvas and just imagining what you want the painting to look like at the end, but also knowing you can't control the paint strokes. You know, the fear was just, I got to bring up a black boy in Mississippi, which is a tough place to bring up kids, period. But there are statistics that say black boys born after the year 2002 have a 1 in 3 chance of going to prison. And all three of my sons were born after the year 2002.
So, Dad, why do you take me to protest so much?
I think I take you for a bunch of reasons. One is that I want you to see what it looks like when people come together. but also that you understand that it's not just about people that are familiar to you, but it's about everybody. Did you know the work that Martin Luther King was doing was for everybody and it wasn't just for black people?
Yes, I understand that.
Yeah. So that's how you got to think. If you decide that you want to be a cab driver, then you got to be the most impactful cab driver that you can possibly be.
Are you proud of me?
Of course. You my man. I just love everything about you, period.
The thing I love about you never give up on me. That's one of the things I will always remember about my dad.
You said it like I'm on the way out of here or like I'm already gone.
So, Dad, what are your dreams for me?
My dream is for you to live out your dreams. It's an old proverb that talks about when children are born, children come out with their fists closed because that's where they keep all their gifts. And as you grow, your hands learn to unfold because you're learning to release your gifts to the world. And so for the rest of your life, I want to see you live with your hands unfolded.
These aren't the sad stories, man. But I do, I think that, this speaks to, I know that Creative Mornings is so much about proximity, even through the pandemic. And, I think what StoryCorps, I hope, reminds us of is the beauty and the poetry and the power and the grace in the stories of everyday people that are hiding in plain sight all around us when we just take the time to listen, and who we really are as Americans. And I'll get to that in a little while because I am in Richmond for a pretty serious purpose. I'm going to play one more, what we call signature StoryCorps stories from the main StoryCorps effort of recording the stories of Americans, giving you the chance to look a loved one in the eye and tell them how much you love them just by asking them the big questions in life. And one of the things about StoryCorps that I think it's important to say is that I know there are a lot of communications and marketing people here, and the marketing communications people at StoryCorps just hate when I say this, but really StoryCorps just reminds us that we're going to die, everything about it. And when you're in the how's that for a pitch? When you're in the booth, you realize that your great-great-great-great-grandkids are going to be listening to this. Again, you're saying the things to. There's something that people who work in hospice say, and they advise people who have family members who are dying, or if you're dying. They talk to you about this, and they say there are 4 things you want to say before you die, or you want to say to the person who you love who's dying, which is thank you, I love you, forgive me, I forgive you. And every day in booths across the country, families are saying that to each other. Hopefully their relative isn't actively dying as they're talking to them, but it's that chance to have a sense of closure with the people who matter to us. I'm going to play one more signature StoryCorps story in honor of Father's Day and pride. I'm the proud son of a gay dad, and we've done about a dozen special initiatives at StoryCorps. We'll pick a vertical in the country and pay a lot of attention to that vertical and record those stories for the Library of Congress. So our first one was with 9/11 families. Everyone who lost a loved one on September 11th comes to StoryCorps to leave a record of that person's life. The Sykes video you just saw is part of a big African American initiative. We have an initiative called Out Loud, which celebrates the stories of LGBTQ people before Stonewall, which was the Rosa Parks moment in 1969 that started in many ways began the gay rights movement. So what was it like to be gay in this country in the 40s, 50s, 60s? Many of these stories are sad. I'm not doing a sad one today. This is a happy one. This is one of those stories from our Out Loud collection. Let's watch.
I'm riding to school with my oldest brother, and on the way to school, I'm putting glitter all over my face. And my brother said, "What in the hell are you doing?" I said, "I'm putting on my costume." He said, "Well, I wouldn't be caught dead wearing that." So he dropped me off at the school and he called my dad up and he said, "Dad, I think you better get up there. This is not going to look good." So my dad drove up to the high school and he had his farmer jeans on and they had cow crap on him and he had his clodhopper boots on. And when I saw him coming, I ducked around the hall and hid from him. And it wasn't because of what I was wearing. It was because of what he was wearing. So the assembly goes well, and I climb in the car, and I'm riding home with my father. And my father says to me, "I was walking down the hall this morning, and I saw a kid that looked a lot like you ducking around the hall to avoid his dad, but I know it wasn't you because you would never do that to your dad." And I squirmed in my seat, and I finally busted out, and I said, "Well, Dad, did you have to wear your cow crap jeans to my assembly?" And he said, "Look, everybody knows I'm a dairy farmer. This is who I am." And he looked me square in the eye. And then he said, "Now, how about you? When you're a full-grown man, who are you going to go out with at night?" And I said, "I don't know." And he said, "I think you do know. And it's not going to be that McLaughlin girl that's been making goo-goo eyes at you, but you won't even pick up the damn telephone. And I'm going to tell you something today, and you might not know what to think of it now, but you're going to remember when you're an adult. Don't sneak, because if you sneak like you did today, it means you think you're doing the wrong thing. And if you run around and spending your whole life thinking that you're doing the wrong thing, then you'll ruin your immortal soul." And out of all the things a father in 1959 could have told his gay son, my father tells me to be proud of myself and not sneak. My reaction at the time was to get out in the hayfield and pretend like I was as much of a man as I could be. And I remember flipping 50-pound bales 3 feet up into the air going, "I'm not a queer. What's he talking about?" But he knew where I was headed. And he knew that making me feel bad about it anyway was the wrong thing to do. I had the patron saint of dads for sissies. And no, I didn't know it at the time, but I know it now.
So I've been fortunate, and those of us at StoryCorps, and I just like to be clear, StoryCorps is a nonprofit in every possible way. All of these services are delivered at no cost to the American people. You know, I've been privileged, along with the thousands of people who've worked at StoryCorps over the years, to have a front row seat on who we are as a country. You know, the facilitators who work at StoryCorps, who serve a year or two traveling around the country recording stories, they call it bearing witness to these stories. When they come back off the road, if you ask them what they've learned, every single one of them, and we've had more than 1,000 facilitators serve with StoryCorps. Every one of them gives a version of the Anne Frank quote, "People are basically good." And there might have been some kind of a selection bias when we were in the hundreds and when we were in the thousands and the tens of thousands. But when you get into the high hundreds of thousands of every kind of person across America, there's got to be some truth to that. We are, it's corny to say, but we're in the human, well, let me just stop. Does anybody have any, let's do one question on StoryCorps if you have it.
Well, I just, full disclosure, I'm a radio executive, but I just wanted to know why, in the video-centric age that we live in, why you think the audio format is so powerful in delivering your stories.
So the question is, why is the audio medium so powerful in delivering the stories? Well, I'm an audio person, and obviously, like, we live in a video-centric society, which is why we have animations that we put out so that they can travel more widely than audio. But, you know, to me, the soul is kind of contained in the human voice, and in many ways, kind of I remember I did an interview with my dad. exactly, and he died exactly 10 years ago. As I said, he was gay, he was a psychiatrist, he was working up until he was diagnosed with cancer. 4 days later, he was dead. And I listened to that interview for the first time on the night that he died at 3 in the morning. And I thought I couldn't believe in StoryCorps any more than I did, but that's when the rubber really hits the road. And listening to that voice, you know, that is him. And I'm an old dad, I have young kids, and I knew that they would listen to this someday and get to know him through that voice, you know. So it's really the power of the human voice and the intimacy in the booth of just looking each other in the eyes, 2 microphones. I mean, you're a radio person, and headphones, and just speaking with each other. No lights, no cameras. It just works. And you know, it's worked from the beginning, so we haven't fucked with it. We do not let cameras into the booth. So thank you for the question. I'm going to, one more question? Yes, hi.
Well, first of all, huge fan. Love seeing or hearing it on the radio, but also love when I can see these fabulous animations paired with it. Can you tell us a little bit about the process of like how you kind of encapsulate these voices in the animations and the illustration?
Sure. So we, you know, the dream of StoryCorps is that, of big StoryCorps, is that someday we'll be part of the fabric of American life and kind of move the needle and have us be a more compassionate country that, you know, listens to each other and, you know, recognizes the value in the story of everyday people. And I mean, you could just, it's like an onion. You can see what the core values of StoryCorps are. I am an audio person, you know, and I did not, we knew that in order to reach young people especially, we needed to add visuals to the stories, but for many years we didn't. We did try, you know, people have come to us and tried to shoot videos, and everything sucked, and we just threw it out. And one day, one of my facilitators, a kid, came into my office, and he said, this is when our computers had DVD slots on the side, and he said, you know, I'm a facilitator for you during the day, but at night I'm an animator, and my brother teaches swimming at the Y, and at night he's an animator too, and we've started animating StoryCorps stories. And I tried to throw him out of my office, but before I could, he jammed his DVD into my computer, and this thing came, and they were our original animators. Some of what you've seen are those animations. And you know, my basic rule was, if we're going to add visuals, it has to be at least as good or better than the audios themselves. And I saw with the animations that they did, Mike and Tim Rauch, that there was a way to take these stories and make them even stronger. So it was kind of game on from there, and we started animating as many of these things as we possibly could. So thank you for the question. I want to get to like the most important thing that I want to talk about today, and we have about 8 minutes to do it. And that is what's happening in Richmond with StoryCorps, and we need all of your help. This is very serious. And I am an incredibly optimistic person, obviously, I think, about this country. And I am scared shitless about what's going on right now. There was a poll that was released yesterday by YouGov and Yahoo that said that half the country at this point says it's likely we'll see a civil war in this country in their lifetime. 5-6 years ago, we at StoryCorps became incredibly concerned about the growing toxic polarization in this country across the political divides. Never concerned about arguing with each other. That is extremely healthy, but very concerned about the fact that we as a country were starting to hate each other and dehumanize each other across the political divides. There are a lot of reasons for that. There's a multi-billion-dollar hate industrial complex out there that is motivated both in the media and social media by money to drive us apart. Again, it's in so many ways the opposite of what Creative Mornings is about. But we have, there are polls, the numbers since 5 years ago, 6 years ago, when we started thinking about it, have just been shooting straight up. 20% of the country now says on both sides that the country would be better off if the entire opposite party was wiped off the face of the earth. So this toxic polarization and dehumanization is extremely dangerous. A democracy cannot survive in a swamp of mutual contempt. And we're moving very, very quickly into a tailspin that I think a lot of people are concerned that we're not going to be able to get out of. So our Hippocratic oath at StoryCorps is to do no harm. And we started developing a new methodology. All of the 650,000 people who had come to StoryCorps up until we started, it wasn't even called One Small Step, but until we started this new effort, were between people who knew and loved each other. And we spent years creating a new methodology of StoryCorps where we put strangers across a political divide together, not to talk about politics, but just to get to know each other as human beings under the premise that it's hard to hate up close. It's called One Small Step for a reason, because it is one very, very small step. But given where this country is headed, we felt that we need to take a shot at it, because if we do nothing, things are not going to end well for this country. Again, sorry to be like a bummer on like Wilderness Day, but this is the truth of where we're going. I'm gonna just quickly. I'm going to play a quick story just in the spirit of One Small Step. This isn't a One Small Step story, but this speaks to kind of the spirit of what we're doing. This is a guy named Joe Weidnick, who's an unemployed sheet metal worker in Austin. Amina Amdeen, student at UT Austin. Amina was at an anti-Trump rally when Joe showed up. And I'm going to let them, this is not a One Small Step interview because they met before and then came together to talk about their meeting, but it does speak to what we're trying to do. So let's listen to Amina and Joe talk about the moment that they met.
I noticed you with the hat, and I noticed that you were surrounded by some people, and I noticed that they were being kind of threatening, and then somebody snatched your hat off your head, and that's the point where something kind of snaps inside me, because I wear a Muslim hijab, and I've been in situations where people have tried to snatch it off my head, and I rushed towards you, and I just started screaming, leave him alone, give me that back.
I don't think we could be any further apart as people, and yet it was just kind of like this common, that's not okay moment. You are genuinely the only Muslim person I know. It's not that I've actively avoided, it's just, I've just never been in a position where I can interact for an extended period of time. So I guess my views on the Muslim community have been influenced by a lot of the news articles and things of that nature.
I feel like a lot of times in the media, you don't see the Roman Muslim, the one that listens to classic rock like I do. You don't need that Muslim.
Can you tell me about where you grew up? What was that part of your life like?
So I was born in Baghdad, in Iraq. I moved to the U.S. when I was 10 years old.
Okay.
Being a Muslim girl, I stood out in almost every single way that you can in middle school, the worst time to stand out. What about you? How was it like when you grew up?
I was homeschooled, so it was a vastly different experience. Socially, I didn't have, I guess, as many friends as most people would. I only went to public school 1 year of my life, and I got in 3 fights, and I lost all of them. I actually lost a lot of friends because of selection, because of my political stance. So I hope that I can be the reason that someone decides to talk to someone as opposed to just cutting them out of their life or blocking them on Twitter, you know?
I'd like for this to encourage other people to engage in more conversations with people that you don't agree with.
What it's all about. I'm so glad I wasn't the only one who felt like that.
So we tested this One Small Step methodology for 4 years and launched about a year ago. We picked 4 cities in the country to focus on. Richmond is one of them. And we are in a very intense, serious effort to try to have everybody in Richmond know that this exists. We're just getting started. We're going to be around for a while. Sonia, who works with me, is in the front row if you want to talk to her. We will have boots on the ground here in Richmond. We want everyone to know about One Small Step, everyone to be aware of the dangers of toxic polarization. We have an advertising campaign right now, which is targeted at conservatives. I don't know how many people in this audience qualify as conservatives and have gotten those advertisements, but we need half conservatives and half liberals in order to make this work. We have 10,000 people on a waiting list right now to participate in One Small Step. If you live in Richmond, you go right to the top of that list. So we want you to go to One Small Step, takeonesmallstep.org and sign up. You can learn more about this. I want to be really respectful of your time and get you out on time. But the dream of One Small Step, well, actually, I'm going to, is Warren or Jerome here? Warren, are you here? Jerome, hey, how you doing? Jerome is one of our One Small Step participants who, from the airport yesterday, as I was like running 4 hours late to a speech last night that I was half an hour late to, we reached out and asked if he would come and join us. He's one of the One Small Step participants. And I'm going to play, this is not a typical One Small Step story. This is a second visit to One Small Step. Warren and Jerome were matched, and then they came back together to talk about what their experience was like. Again, these are 50-minute conversations between strangers. You fill out a form, you're matched with a stranger, and we started virtually and now they're face-to-face. You come together with that person. You do not talk about politics. You get to know them as a human being for 50 minutes, and the kind of results that we're seeing, I think because people are so scared and separated that they expect to really not like the person that they sit with. And it's almost belies belief, but everybody comes out loving the person that they've done this interview with. Again, which speaks to this truth that we know through StoryCorps about the basic goodness of people. 90% of this country are, in studies, are part of what's called the exhausted majority. They're scared of the division. They want a way out. And we hope that this is one small step, just a little light at the end of the tunnel, where Richmond can show the rest of the country how this can be done. So I'm just going to play just a quick excerpt of Warren and Jerome talking about their One Small Step experience. Sorry.
What was the thing that stuck with you after our previous conversation, Drew?
Based on your military background, based on your upbringing, it was interesting to me that you saw people for their character more so than anything else. You know, you looked at how we kind of damage each other in society and that we need to talk about it and stop that. And then we kind of said, let's talk to each other, let's go to dinner and lunch. And I was like, oh, that sounds great.
Yeah, we hit it off right away. We have the same ideas about how to improve our country. Our country's so divided now.
We can do better. And I think that's what One Small Step is doing, is allowing people to have those conversations to talk about our similarities instead of our differences. As far as our relationship is concerned, I feel as though I've known you forever.
Yeah.
You are a dear, dear friend, and I cannot imagine you not being in my life at this point.
Yeah, well, it's been reciprocal.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to have lunch together maybe next week or so. We'll get you to come here to the college and we'll sit down and talk politics and sports and whatever you want to talk about.
Sounds good, sounds good.
Okay, so that's it for me. It is 10 o'clock on the dot. Michelle's going to come by and say goodnight. Come out. I don't want to keep you late, so I'm not going to answer any more questions. Go to takeonesmallstep.org. Learn more about this. We need everyone to be a part of this. 2024 is going to be an absolute shit show for this country. We need your help. We want Richmond to show the rest of the country that it is possible for us to listen to each other. We do not need this beautiful country that we live in together to fall apart, and we can save it just by listening to each other and assuming the best in each other and not calling people names. So there is a way out, and I'm excited for Richmond to show the way to the rest of the country. Thank you so much. I'm sorry I stayed late.
So
Okay. Thank you.
so
Thank you. Thank you.